Picture this: a passenger ferry, gleaming white against the deep blue of the Mediterranean Sea, pulls away from the dock on a warm September morning in 1982. 100 passengers wave goodbye to loved ones, their voices carrying across the water with laughter and anticipation. The ferry, MS Serenity, is making what should be a routine 6-hour crossing from Cyprus to Lebanon. The captain radios his position at 9:15 a.m., his voice crackling through the static, with practiced confidence. That was the last anyone ever heard from them. No distress calls, no wreckage reported, no bodies recovered. Just silence. For 42 years, the mystery haunted maritime investigators and the families left behind. Where did they go? What happened to Captain Dimitris Kovac, his crew of 12, and the 87 passengers who boarded that morning believing they were simply crossing the sea? Then in 2024, a geological survey team mapping underground water sources in the Sahara Desert stumbled upon something extraordinary. Something that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about that September day in 1982. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear this story. If you're comfortable, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, let me tell you what really happened to MS Serenity and the 100 souls who vanished without a trace. The story begins in the autumn of 1982, when political tensions across the Mediterranean were reaching a boiling point. The region was a powder keg of conflicting interests, territorial disputes, and proxy wars that made every journey potentially dangerous. But for the people who lived there, life had to go on. Families needed to reunite, businesses needed to operate, and the MS Serenity represented one of the few reliable connections between Cyprus and the Lebanese coast. MS Serenity was a modest vessel, built in Greece in 1967. At 15 years old, she was showing her age but remained seaworthy and dependable. The ferry could carry up to 150 passengers, though she rarely sailed at full capacity. Captain Dimitris Kovac had commanded her for 8 years, navigating the sometimes treacherous waters of the Eastern Mediterranean with skill that had earned respect from passengers and port authorities alike. On September 17, 1982, 100 people boarded MS Serenity at Limassol Harbor in Cyprus. They were a cross-section of Mediterranean life. Businessmen in suits carrying briefcases, families with excited children clutching toys, elderly couples making what had become a familiar journey, students returning to university, and laborers heading to construction jobs. Among them was Maria Constantinou, a 34-year-old teacher traveling with her 2 daughters, ages 7 and 9, to visit her mother in Beirut. Also aboard was Father Andreas Papadopoulos, a Greek Orthodox priest who kept a detailed journal of his travels. His writings, discovered decades later in his parish archives, would provide one of the few first-hand accounts of the ferry's final departure. He described the morning as blessed with calm seas and clear skies, noting that the children played on deck while their parents shared coffee and conversation, unaware that this ordinary journey would become their last. The crew consisted of 12 experienced mariners. Captain Kovac, at 53, was the oldest. His first mate, Yanis Makris, was a family man with 3 children waiting for him back in Cyprus. The chief engineer, Hassan al-Rashid, was a Lebanese national who had worked on ferries for 20 years. Together, they formed a tight-knit team that had weathered storms, mechanical failures, and the occasional drunk passenger with equal professionalism. At 9 a.m. sharp, MS Serenity cast off from Limassol Harbor. The morning was indeed perfect for sailing. Light winds, calm seas, and visibility stretching for miles in every direction. The ferry's diesel engines rumbled to life, and she turned her bow eastward toward Lebanon, following a route that had been sailed thousands of times before. At 9:15 a.m., Captain Kovac radioed Limassol Port Authority with a standard position report. MS Serenity departing on schedule. Weather conditions optimal. Estimated arrival Beirut, 15:30 hours. 100 souls aboard. The transmission was acknowledged, and the ferry disappeared from view as she steamed toward the horizon. What happened next remained a complete mystery for the next 42 years. When MS Serenity failed to arrive in Beirut that afternoon, concern began to mount. The ferry's radio operator, Stavros Dimitriou, had been scheduled to make hourly position reports, but after the 9:15 a.m. transmission, nothing was received. By 1600 hours, when the ferry was 2 hours overdue, Lebanese port authorities contacted their counterparts in Cyprus. Search and rescue operations began immediately. The route MS Serenity should have taken was well established and heavily trafficked. Other vessels in the area were contacted, but none reported seeing the missing ferry. Aircraft were scrambled to scan the waters along the expected route. The search continued for 9 days, covering thousands of square miles of Mediterranean Sea. Investigators found nothing. No oil slicks that would indicate a sunken vessel. No debris field suggesting explosion or collision. No lifeboats, no bodies, no wreckage of any kind. The sea had apparently swallowed MS Serenity and her 100 passengers without leaving a single trace. Maritime officials considered every possibility. Had the ferry been attacked by one of the military factions operating in the region? There was no evidence of combat, no witnesses reporting explosions or gunfire. Had they encountered a freak storm that capsized the vessel? Weather records showed calm conditions throughout the day. Had there been some catastrophic mechanical failure that caused the ship to sink so quickly that no distress call could be sent? The scenario seemed unlikely given Captain Kovac's experience and the ferry's recent safety inspection. The most disturbing theory involved piracy or hijacking. The early 1980s saw numerous incidents of vessels being seized for political or financial purposes. But hijackers typically made demands or claims of responsibility. In the case of MS Serenity, there was only silence. The official report filed 6 months later listed MS Serenity as lost at sea with all hands. Captain Dimitris Kovac, his 12 crew members, and 87 passengers were declared legally dead. Their families received the dreaded notification, but without bodies or wreckage. Hope lingered that somehow, somewhere, their loved ones might still be alive. Maria Constantinu's husband, Nikos, never accepted the official conclusion. He spent years searching for any scrap of information about his wife and daughters. He hired private investigators, consulted with maritime experts, and even traveled to Lebanon multiple times to interview dock workers and fishermen. Nothing was ever found. Father Andreas Papadopoulos' parish kept his empty chair at the altar for a decade, hoping their beloved priest would somehow return. His journal entries, found years later in the church archives, described his anticipation of seeing old friends in Beirut and his plans to visit holy sites. The final entry, written the morning of September 17th, consisted of a simple prayer: "May God guide our passage across these ancient waters." The families never stopped searching. Annual memorial services were held in Cyprus, candles lit for those who vanished. But as the years passed and no new evidence emerged, the mystery of MS Serenity faded from public attention. It became another tragedy in a region that had seen too many, a footnote in maritime disaster records. The ferry's disappearance was occasionally discussed by conspiracy theorists who proposed increasingly elaborate explanations. Some suggested the vessel had been secretly commandeered for military purposes. Others theorized about experimental weapons tests gone wrong. A few even proposed supernatural explanations involving the Bermuda Triangle, despite the Mediterranean being thousands of miles from that infamous region. But the truth, when it finally emerged in 2024, would prove stranger than any theory anyone had imagined. Dr. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her ground-penetrating radar equipment one more time, wiping sweat from her forehead as the Sahara heat shimmered across the endless dunes. The geological survey was entering its 5th week, and the team had mapped over 300 square kilometers of desert without finding anything more exciting than some unusual mineral deposits and ancient underground water channels. Her equipment that morning started normally enough. Sand layers appeared as expected, showing typical stratification built up over millennia. Occasional rock formations registered as solid masses on her display screen. But as Dr. Mitchell moved her scanner across a particularly flat section of desert, approximately 400 miles inland from the Mediterranean coast, something anomalous appeared on her monitor. The radar was detecting a massive metal object approximately 30 meters below the surface, far too large and far too regular in shape to be natural. At first, She assumed it was probably ancient mining equipment or perhaps debris from modern military exercises. The Sahara was littered with abandoned machinery from various periods of human activity. But as she expanded her scan area, the shape became more defined, more deliberate. This wasn't scattered debris or random metal fragments. The object showed clear geometric patterns, the unmistakable lines of a constructed vessel. Most puzzling of all, the metal signature was consistent with the ship's hull. "Klaus, you need to see this." Dr. Mitchell called to her research partner, Dr. Klaus Weber, who had been collecting sand core samples 50 meters away. Dr. Weber was initially skeptical when he examined the readings. They were in the middle of the Sahara Desert, hundreds of miles from any body of water. The idea of finding a ship buried in the sand seemed absurd. But one look at Mitchell's radar display changed his perspective entirely. The underground object was extensive, approximately 40 meters in length, with a distinctive profile that naval architects would immediately recognize as a passenger ferry. The hull appeared to be intact, not collapsed or fragmented like wreckage from a crash. This vessel had somehow ended up deep beneath the Sahara sands, preserved by the dry desert environment. That evening, back at their temporary research station, Dr. Mitchell contacted her department head at Cambridge University. Professor David Reynolds had overseen dozens of geological surveys throughout North Africa and was familiar with the region's complex geological history. When Mitchell described their discovery, Reynolds' response was immediate and decisive. Work would stop until proper authorities could be notified. The discovery was too significant and potentially too dangerous to proceed without expert oversight. Within 72 hours, the quiet desert location was transformed into a carefully controlled excavation site. Maritime archaeologists arrived from universities across Europe. Tunisian government officials conducted hushed consultations about the legal implications of the discovery, while international maritime authorities tried to understand how a ship could possibly be found hundreds of miles inland in one of the world's driest deserts. The excavation began with extreme caution. 42 years of desert winds had created massive sand dunes over the site, completely concealing any surface evidence of what lay beneath. The team had to rely entirely on radar mapping to guide their digging. Each shovelful of sand had to be carefully sifted and documented in case it contained artifacts or clues about how the vessel had arrived at this impossible location. 3 days into the excavation, they hit metal. The discovery sent a surge of excitement through the archaeological team, confirming that their underground anomaly was indeed artificial and substantial. But it also raised new questions that defied every law of physics, geography, and common sense. As more of the structure was exposed, its identity became shockingly apparent. What they had found was not some ancient vessel from when the Sahara was last wet thousands of years ago. This was a modern passenger ferry, and it was remarkably well preserved. The hull paint, though faded and covered in sand, was still visible, white with blue trim, exactly as ferry companies in the Mediterranean had painted their vessels in the early 1980s. The name on the bow, partially obscured but still legible, made Dr. Mitchell's blood run cold. MS Serenity, the ferry that had vanished 42 years earlier with 100 people aboard, had been found, not at the bottom of the Mediterranean where logic dictated it should be, but buried deep beneath the Sahara Desert, 400 miles from where it had disappeared. The implications were staggering. How had a ferry traveled hundreds of miles overland without anyone noticing? Why was it buried so deeply? And most importantly, what had happened to the 100 souls who had been aboard when it vanished? Dr. Mitchell stood at the edge of the excavation, staring down at the impossible vessel emerging from the sand, and realized they had uncovered more than just a missing ship. They had found evidence of something that challenged everything humanity understood about physics, geography, and the nature of reality itself. The excavation of MS Serenity took 6 weeks. The ferry was buried at an angle, tilted approximately 15 degrees to starboard, as if it had been gently placed, rather than crashed or deliberately hidden. The preservation was extraordinary, protected from moisture by the desert's extreme dryness. The vessel's structure remained largely intact despite 4 decades underground. Dr. Helena Kovac, a maritime archaeologist from Athens University and distant relative of Captain Dimitris Kovac, led the interior examination. Her team approached the discovery with painstaking care, documenting every detail before disturbing anything. The ferry's external features were photographed from every angle, and additional ground-penetrating radar was used to map the vessel's interior before they attempted entry. The moment of breakthrough came on a scorching Tuesday morning in late August. After carefully removing sand that had infiltrated through the ferry's ventilation systems, the excavation team finally opened the main passenger deck door. The sound it made, a metallic groan echoing across the desert silence, sent chills through everyone present. Inside, the ferry was frozen in time. Passengers' belongings were scattered throughout the cabin exactly as they had been left 42 years earlier. Suitcases sat in overhead racks. A child's doll lay on a bench seat. Coffee cups, now containing only dried residue, remained on tables where conversations had been interrupted. But what made the discovery truly extraordinary and deeply disturbing was what they didn't find. There were no bodies, no human remains of any kind. 100 people had been aboard MS Serenity when it vanished. The physical evidence of their presence was everywhere. Personal photographs, identification documents, clothing, even medications with passengers' names on the prescription bottles. But the people themselves had vanished as completely as the ferry had 42 years earlier. Dr. Kovac's team worked methodically through the vessel's interior, cataloging each item with the care reserved for the most significant archaeological discoveries. The passenger manifest, found in the captain's cabin, confirmed 100 names. Every passenger was accounted for in terms of their belongings, but their actual fate remained unknown. The discovery of Captain Dimitri's Kovac's logbook provided the first real clues about what had happened. The leather-bound journal had been protected from sand infiltration by the captain's sealed desk drawer. When Dr. Kovac opened it, her hands trembling slightly as she recognized her distant relative's distinctive handwriting, she found entries that defied rational explanation. The log's final entries, dated September 17, 1982, described events that seemed impossible. 9:15 hours. Departed Limassol on schedule. Sea conditions optimal. All systems functioning normally. 10:47 hours. Encountered unusual atmospheric phenomenon. Dense fog bank appeared without warning. Visibility reduced to 0. Temperature dropping rapidly. This is highly irregular for Mediterranean conditions in September. 11:23 hours. Fog intensifying. Compass behaving erratically. Radio communications failing. Attempting to maintain course, but navigation instruments unreliable. 12:05 hours. Visibility still 0. Passengers becoming anxious. Father Andreas leading prayers in main cabin. Chief engineer reports engine temperature fluctuations we cannot explain. The next entry showed Captain Kovac's growing concern, his handwriting becoming less steady. 13:40 hours. We are no longer in the Mediterranean. I know how this sounds, but the water beneath us has changed color and consistency. The fog finally cleared, and we find ourselves on what appears to be an inland sea or massive lake. The surrounding landscape is unlike anything along our route. Rocky cliffs where there should be open water. This is impossible, yet here we are. Dr. Kovac read the entry 3 times, her scientific mind struggling with what the word suggested. But the log continued, documenting events that became progressively more bizarre. 15:15 hours. The water is disappearing. I can see the lake level dropping visibly. We're running aground on what appears to be a sandy bottom. All attempts to restart engines and move the vessel have failed. First Mate Macris reports passengers in a state of panic. We have no explanation to offer them. 16:30 hours. We are now completely aground. The water has vanished entirely, leaving us stranded on what can only be described as desert sand. The temperature is extreme, far beyond anything normal for this region. I have ordered all passengers to remain inside where we have some protection from the heat. 1800 hours. Sent distress signals on all frequencies. No response. Our position makes no sense according to our instruments, if they can even be trusted. The sun is setting, and we face a night in this impossible place, with dwindling supplies and 100 frightened people depending on us for answers we don't have. The final entry in Captain Kovac's log was dated September 18th, 1982. Morning of second day. Sent crew to explore our surroundings. They report nothing but sand dunes in every direction, extending to the horizon. No landmarks, no vegetation, no signs of civilization. We have somehow been transported to what appears to be the Sahara Desert. I am a rational man, trained in navigation and science, but I cannot explain this. Whatever brought us here defies the laws of physics as I understand them. Father Andreas says we have passed into another realm. Perhaps he is right. The passengers are calm now, accepting what cannot be changed. We will ration our remaining water and food while we decide what to do. If anyone finds this log, please tell our families we did not abandon hope. We simply walked into something we could not understand or escape. The words trailed off, leaving the fate of MS Serenity's passengers unresolved. This is only the beginning. The truth gets darker from here.